America, what's quite remarkable is that she remains deeply connected to her immigrant roots. Consequently, the American diasporic experience, I think, has been integral to her work. She received her degree in polymer engineering from Case Western Reserve University and her MFA from Yale. In fact, she was recently appointed the inaugural post-colonial critic at the Yale School of Art. Her works have been displayed at the Whitney Museum of American Art in New York City, at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, and she also quite recently held a very prestigious artist residency at the Centre Pompidou in Paris. So as the Jeanette K. Watson Distinguished Visiting Professor, Rina joins a long and impressive legacy of scholars and writers who have held this professorship at Syracuse University. And these include and are not restricted to Noam Chomsky, Margaret Atwood, Toni Morrison, Sherry Moraga, Angela Davis, and Larry Blumenfeld, among many, many others. As a visual artist, she joins an equally impressive legacy that has seen the likes of Joseph Alpers, I.M. Pei, Sol Lewitt, Ben Shahn, Kiki Smith, Stephanie Shear, and Wendy Redstar on our campus. Her residency, however, brings the unique combination of artist and polymer scientist to SU. Rina's residency complements an exhibition of her extraordinary work at the Syracuse University Art Museum titled Take Me to the Palace of Love, which I invite all of you to visit if you have a chance. Be prepared to take in a monumental, reimagined Taj Mahal made out of pink plastic wrap, exquisite drawings that transport you into the world of strange and familiar creatures, a sculpture based on an African-American woman resurrected from the archives. And Rina's work has a lot to do with the archive. And the ferocity of climate change unfurling across the floor and swirling above your head. Rina and I met as graduate students in the 1990s at Yale. So we are dating ourselves here a little bit. And here we are nearly 25 years later in Syracuse, where graduate students from the Department of Art and Music Histories and the Goldring Arts Journalism and Communications program will interview her. And I wanted this to be a deliberate move on our part, that Rina's residency was inaugurated by our students, because they are the next generation who will take forward our ideas and exchanges. And so it gives me great pleasure to introduce both these wonderful students to you. Ankush Arora, my graduate advisee, who is an MA candidate in the art history program in my department. Prior to joining SU, Ankush worked as an arts journalist in India, where he was born. Ankush has also created a stunning wall of Mithila paintings from our museum collections in dialogue with Rina's exhibition. So he has played a very valuable role in this entire project. Next, we have Natalie Rieth, who is a member of the Goldring Arts Journalism and Communications cohort in the Newhouse School, concentrating on visual arts. Natalie hopes to make a meaningful career out of her love of art by applying her knowledge of writing and communications to an arts organization, a museum, or gallery space. And she too has been an enthusiastic participant, has hit the ground running, as they say, for this project. Natalie and Ankush's conversation with Rina will be moderated by my colleague, Professor Sam Johnson, who is the Carol and Alvin Schragus Faculty Fellow, Assistant Professor of Art History, and Director of Undergraduate Studies in Fine Arts. Professor Johnson is a specialist in the art and architecture of the Russian and Soviet avant-gardes And he's working on a book titled El Lissitzky on Paper, Print Culture, Architecture, Politics, 1919 through 1933. And when Rina's exhibition opened at the museum, Sam came up to me beaming, saying, "It's spectacular." And this is the word he used, which I think all of you will agree with me when you go to the exhibition: wild. It was the ultimate compliment, I think. So I'm so deeply grateful to you, Sam, to you, Ankush, and to you, Natalie, for inaugurating Rina's residency today. Being Rina Banerjee is part of a 3-year project. Of course, she has been Rina Banerjee before that as well. But the conversation today is part of a very long 3-year project, which has survived a global pandemic, and it has seen many, many unexpected twists and turns. Special thanks to the SU Art Museum. Emily Dittman, who is representing the SU Art Museum, the interim director, is one of my co-hosts. You can see her on the screen here. Of course, special thanks also to the SU Humanities Center, who has played a key role in this project, the Engaged Humanities Network, led by Bryce Nordquist, the Special Collections Research Center, the South Asia Center, my department, and 26 other departments and units across campus. And by this, I mean the engineering department, the humanities, actually the engineering school, humanities, social sciences, the hard sciences, as well as the arts. So we really have rallied together to participate in this residency and to welcome Rina to our campus. In addition, I must do a shout out to our dedicated SU alumnus, Todd Rubin, who is the president of the Republic of Tea, who has sent a special variety of tea for Rina's residency that all of you who are in town can take and sip and enjoy while you partake of her events. All of them are collectively co-sponsoring Rina's residency and exhibition. And last but not least, we are very generously supported by a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts. A full list of Rina's residency events can be found on the Humanities Center and Museum websites. I invite all of you to join us for them. Rina's public in-person lecture will take place this Thursday, February 23rd. Her residency will end with a public in-person dialogue with the formidable Gayatri Spivak on Friday, March 3rd. In between, a host of exciting conversations and workshops have been organized at the museum and the Special Collections Research Center, along with a community art-making activity in Salt City Market, which is located in downtown Syracuse. Some of these will be live streamed on the museum's Instagram handle. The themes of diaspora and displacement weave their way through Rina's life, as well as our discussion today. With that in mind, I acknowledge with respect the Onondaga Nation, firekeepers of the Haudenosaunee, the indigenous people on whose ancestral lands Syracuse University now stands, and the histories and identities of the displaced can never be far from our minds as we begin Rina's residency and embark on a series of conversations that will bring us back, hopefully, to land, people, nature, and the loss and retrieval of love. Please join me in welcoming Rina Banerjee, Ankush Arora, Natalie Rieth, and Sam Johnson. Thank you. And over to you, Ankush, now for the first question of the evening. Take it away.
Thank you, Professor Ray, for the introduction. Hello, Rina. Welcome to Syracuse. Let me start because the exhibition's theme is love, and one of the major works in your exhibition is called Take Me, Take Me, Take Me to the Palace of Love. I want to begin by asking you, what does love mean to you? And how does the idea of love shape your work?
I think one of the things that bring people to enjoy art is love itself, the instantaneous recognition of intimacy that's created not through or between human beings, animal, or plant, but the unexpected object. And what's invested in that object is all those things that create love. in our world, in our society, in nature. I find that that is the most important element, that is the driving force for my work. What really begs me to create more work, but to really contemplate on how an object lives beyond ourselves, our own mortality, and how it reaches audiences, people, and cultural spaces that are hard to imagine. It's the desire that is created out of love that really opens those doors.
What is one of your favorite materials that you've incorporated into a work of art, and what drew you to that particular object or material?
Well, that's a harder one to answer. There's a lot of materials that I still haven't used in my work. It seems always that there's too many materials when I start thinking about what I want to incorporate, and then the kind of impact of editing allows you to choose something that is your favorite. The favorite changes from, time of day, mood, different points in your life where certain materials have more traction in your life. I think, I really love textiles. It's something that you're forced to realize when you're wearing your clothes, and that everyone wears clothes that are human, and even cats and dogs and pets do too, to join us in that love. And I think that materials that are used to create clothing have a special place that is different from, let's say, seashells or feathers, which I really love as well. I think the main thing is that when we talk about what is our favorite material, it's not so much that it is a favorite that draws us to use or think about the material, but it's really this idea that you don't know something that you are at once attracted to, but is mysterious. Mysterious maybe because you haven't explored it, mysterious because in some ways making art out of that material allows you a kind of place to stop all thinking about other things, the daily activities, and to suggest, let's all think about this one thing. If it's clothing, if it's not clothing as an object, but the materials that make up clothing, or is it a feather, or is it a feather fan? Is it a conch shell, or is it the horn that the conch shell is used as? This kind of, I would say, vibration we feel between whether it is explicitly a material that I'm using, or is it an object, the kind of place where you come to a sculpture and ask yourself, is it the material that draws you, or is it the object the material is making itself known to you through? Recognition is often the way in which we begin our conversation with what we see. And often the mistakes we made in recognition allows us to reconsider the larger world.
Thank you, Rina. My next question is, since you were born in India, and I could not help but ask this question, do you have a favorite hero, heroine, or villain from Bollywood? And do you see any of your own characters as performers?
Well, that's a very specific question. I have to say I was not allowed to watch Bollywood movies as I was growing up, but not to exclude only Bollywood movies, but there was this kind of safety of not watching TV and not watching movies, and a kind of, curation that came to be in our home. And my parents we didn't really watch TV or movies very much, and it probably led me to become an artist because a lot of what we did was to play. And my mom and my father as well really wanted us to play outdoors, often in nature. And I continued to really be activated by that as I grew older. So I was never really that drawn to Netflix or who the latest stars are, what their names are in any continent whatsoever. So I find myself really blind to that. But at the same time, it is very much part of our culture, this idea of Bollywood, this idea of Hollywood, the stars, the kind of glamour that surrounds us that we desire to be part of, to be connected to each other and that unique place that a single person of talent or mystery takes on. And I think that's important for all artists to think about and people to think about. Certainly in terms of acting, that's become more and more a place that is visited by all professions as it becomes mainstream. Whether you're an artist or you're a professor or you're a dentist or what we call bedside manners for doctor, this feeling that how we relate to each other, our socialization becomes more and more relevant as we become connected to the internet and social media, but also aware of our tolerance for different people, whether it's in the diaspora or difference because of racial, gender reasons. We've come to understand that through Bollywood, through Hollywood, through the stage, that these representations, while they may have been neglectful in the past, have to create a kind of mirror image into the future for both artists and all the other professions that adorn that stage for performance.
I wonder if I might ask, because you draw this connection between very ordinary performances in daily life, and you say that you're not inspired necessarily by stars and glamorous performers on the screen, but you're the characters we see in your art are so extraordinary. I wonder if you could say something about what performances do inspire those characters for you.
Well, I do agree that the characters, as you say, both in the drawings, paintings, and in the sculpture, there are sculptures that are very uniquely and very clearly the currency of figurative work. And it has a kind of place in suggesting that the figure is animated, and the figure in many ways kind of emerges out of these materials that collide and transform the figure of ordinary to the extraordinary. And the extraordinary then becomes a transformative space for people to imagine what they like, who they are, what they enjoy, and what is left out in that kind of vocabulary of how we adorn ourselves, how we dress ourselves, how we manage to choose to become ourselves, a kind of creation of our own doing. And where free will or a kind of reference to freedom and justice plays a role in defining what we can be. And it is a collaborative kind of space where it's both everything in the world, all the people, and everything you can manage to send message to is brought into play to create a collaborative space for you to then realize in that mirror who you are. And that takes this kind of place in my work, in my figurative work. But I do think that all things are figurative. Mountains are figurative. I do think trees are. I think architecture is a figurative thing. I really believe in the kind of not blending, but the trespasses that we allow ourselves to consider are essential in making our reality more fluid and more shapeable.
Thank you for your response, Rina. I admire your collection of colorful and uniquely shaped glasses, and I'm curious to hear how you curate your personal wardrobe. How do you dress to empower yourself with creativity or confidence?
Well, I think dressing yourself is a very important way of one, having fun, enjoying what's out there. It's not just disguise, but to suggest that you can be different things on different days, but also in just really considering how much we've really grown to allow ourselves to wear what we want to wear. I mean, I remember in my father's experience of going to work, there was this dress down day on Fridays. And, you know, there are certain times where you can break the monotony of dressing a certain way, work clothes. It was really especially important. I remember coming out of graduate school and with the College Art Association, what we all might be familiar with, there was actually a room of professors and scholars who were in the academic kind of league that would tell you what professional dress was. And it meant to not clearly show markers of your ethnicity, that you were feminine, that masculinity was outlined very clearly. And we were asked to wear suits to our interviews. I was specifically told not to wear earrings and especially not a nose ring, which I didn't really have at all. Not to wear color. And all these kinds of formulaic ways in which we allow people to have confidence in us is also a way to take away confidence, to allow certain ideas of what is promoted, accepted, and valued to go as the foreground of every conversation. And we've really kind of walked away from that more and more throughout my life. I've seen that, and certainly in my wardrobe as I've encountered different ways of dressing. I think it's really important for artists to be engaged in the kind of pleasure of knowing oneself through experimentation. And I think that more and more we've come to realize in our socialization that all those kinds of signals of what you are comes out of who has the right to suggest what is fashionable and what is not. And I think that this becomes a very important place to talk seriously about how we find ourselves dressed in the morning. So I'm always engaged with that. And certainly, as you've seen with comments about glasses and what it means, I've worn glasses since 3rd grade, I think. And finally, I don't have to wear glasses necessarily because sometimes I choose not to wear anything on my eyes, or I wear contacts. So all these things have become choices we've made. And I think that what we've become familiar with is the power of those kinds of choices on the people around us and who is able to speak more loudly in those circumstances.
Thank you, Rina. I have a question about material. One of your sculptures, Viola from New Orleans, uses a lot of clothing materials, such as silks and shawls, and including some from India. Could you tell us any interesting backstory behind collecting those items, or about your favorite dress from India that may have contributed to that work?
So Viola actually wears more fabric or textile on her wings than any other area. In some ways, I think of her as skeletal. And she has these wings that are adorned in textiles that have accumulated over years, but also come from the garment industry in New York City, where my studio was at the time that I made the piece. And the garment industry is a kind of global market. The things that I've used in making Viola come from my own neighborhood, where my residence is in Manhattan, but also from, Korea, Japan, China, linens from kimonos, Kashmiri shawls, as you may have noticed, beads, a whole culture of beads from Africa and from Philippines, Hawaii, all kinds of beads from the South Pacific, South America, Peru, Ecuador. I mean, the list goes on. What you find in New York City is, you hope, is you find the world. And you find the world that is all human. And the technologies that they've really accrued over thousands of years of understanding the cloth, the chemistry that goes behind it, the kind of skillfulness of the hand that allows you to use the tools that have made these materials valuable. It's not just the value of the silk or the value of the linen or the mud cloth. It's really the value of human ideas that created the technology that allows beautiful things to be transparent and become currency, that we agree that this thing from this place and this thing from the other place is valuable, creating a whole vocabulary of transcontinental trade that marks the colonial period as a kind of height, where all things that are worthy can be brought to one place where power reigns. And I think with that, there was all these kinds of gates closed, and people had to scramble to reroute themselves away from the traditional silk route to come to the United States. And so follows my inquiry into Viola's past and her kind of reference to Black Bengalis who came in the 1860s to the ports of the United States, a kind of history that is uncovered and is being claimed now, that joins very different racial backgrounds to forge a place of safety to create trade, to create their own trade and their expression. So Viola, who is from New Orleans, is then that deposit of all things that came together from different places that you would not know about or understand in its complexity unless you accept all things simultaneously that cannot be forged. And I think that made using fabrics in fragments, torn pieces that were kind of stitched together, forced together, bent, and devoured by the skeleton form, her beauty, her kind of activity with these Indian rakes that cultivate the land. And there's this beautiful diaphanous parachute behind her, both seemingly like a parachute, but also the dome and a reflection of the flower, the pollination that takes place, where she's really that thing that comes out of the flower. So this kind of wonderment we have for how things came to be from across waters, where it was, censored or tabooed, brought through smuggling, through thieves, through the kind of embrace of migration, is very important in really kind of pleasuring in those fabrics from elsewhere.
Thank you, Rina. For my next question, I'd like to ask you, if you weren't an artist, what would you be?
Can you repeat that? I'm not sure if I.
Yes, my question is, if you weren't an artist, what would you be as your career?
Oh, I don't know. I think, I do think everyone is in many ways an artist. To be human, I think you have to be visually engaged. We're visual creatures, and I think we like to make things. I think the other day I went to visit a really wonderful budding art historian, curator for conversation in the financial district. And I walked through the park of City Hall. It's a beautiful park that is just at the foot of the Woolworth building. And in a tree was a nest that was made by a bird. And every nest has this moment that you like in its kind of making. And I could see, even though it was quite high, maybe third story, there was a little pink sock that was hanging out of the nest. Everything else was easy to forget. There were leaves, there were straws, there was pieces of bottle caps and plastic and thread and hair, and maybe even the tumbleweed of human hair that I could see was very leaky. And tossed high up, I could notice that one item remained really whole, not shredded. That was this hot pink sock that drew my attention. And I think that we all make things. We make our home. We make our nest. We make the world our home, and our country our home, our street our home, where we work our home. And in making that, we are really involved in this creative process that requires us to think about what makes us happy and draws us to this place that we visit every day. And I think that is a very creative process. And I think that we all send that message to each other, that it's important. And I'm happy that I have this title, if you can call it a title, as a profession. But I also love the profession that it doesn't have to be qualified by academia, that it doesn't have to be qualified by a superior culture, that it doesn't have to be qualified by who our leaders are, who they are not, whether we're in a time of war or peace or the end of the world, or the beginning of the world. And we don't have to kind of suggest that only humans can partake in making art. And I think that makes me desire to be an artist. The kind of possibilities seem endless.
Thank you, Rina. Your sculptures at the museum show different forms of plant life, such as the red-colored moss in the pink Taj, as well as in a world loss. How did you go about collecting these materials, and what would be their relationship with humans, animals, and inanimate objects that we see in your work?
Well, there's always this boundary that you have to consider where something becomes an object, something becomes alive, something is dead, inanimate. And I like playing with those boundaries. Definitely, I'm interested in landscapes, plant and flora, and the whole kind of study of botanicals. There is a definitive attempt in nomenclature to define even something like moss as Spanish moss, a moss or plant or leaf or feather or people or buildings coming from a place. And we do this very clearly with artists and art coming from this place, an origin of sorts, defines it. In some ways, it gives it the gravity of transparency that allows us to call it a currency. For example, Spanish moss, the red moss that you see in these images, is very valuable. And sometimes it's called reindeer moss. It's sort of like how we use words to play on other things, like the word eggplant. Eggplant is purple. It doesn't really look like an egg. And it is a plant, or from a plant, I should say. So the inaccuracy of these nomenclature, as well as it's kind of driven to form concrete names, allow us to really reconsider that what happens when the name is devoured by the art object, the larger sculpture in an installation where things become other things. They are transformed, they disguise, they play upon your imagination, your ability to see more, know more. It's not really trickery that I'm after. It's more that where can we go from looking at a sculpture or looking at art or looking at a room where the sculpture is in. I think with a lot of my work, the playing becomes a way of understanding how we relate to these objects, whether it's the scale of the sculpture or its movement. There's a certain level of movement that is entertained when you miniaturize those objects or maximize them, create them larger than life or too large for a space. And I think that site-specific work allows the pleasure of fitting it in a room in a way that is unexpected from place to place. So in some sense, it's a new work. And I think that with World Lost, the work on the bottom right corner, I think I always make it anew for each place. And that allows it to have this feeling of being alive or fresh. I don't know if one could really feel that the work is live. You know, it doesn't move away from you, that you move into it. But that whole movement of moving into it creates a kind of intimacy that you are unable to know what you're looking at. And so you're drawn to look at it closer and closer. And I think that when you do come into spaces that are exhibition spaces primarily, that are designed for you to slow down, you have this leisure time that is your gift, that you're taking upon yourself to say, I'm in a museum, I can slow down and I can see and think. And I think that's what makes making the work in quantity and quality and in breadth and in kind of limitless ways that you're searching for as an artist important, that you know this is where our viewers will come as people.
Thank you, Rina. My final question for you is, how do you decide the intensity of detail that you wish to include in a work? Is a work of art ever complete?
Well, I think the word complete is a hard one. I mean, I don't think there's any such thing as completeness, really. But there is a kind of readiness that I feel when I just like kind of put my hand to my forehead and say, okay, take it out of my sight. And we have this kind of feeling of exhaustion, that you're kind of ready to release. And I think for me, more and more, this kind of labor, mental labor, intellectual labor, emotional labor, the labor of hours, the labor of invisible hours. That's our whole life, those invisible hours that we spend being engaged with things that we're attracted to. And then we invite other people to kind of handle it, kind of put forward their ideas, their feelings, their intellect into the things that we've thought about to create a kind of new space. And that's when I'm really activated and I come into your space at Syracuse Art Museum and see it in a very different context because of where we are and who I'm engaged with, your students, your faculty. And then I think this piece has a different level of completeness, a different kind of objectness because of that psychological space that I've entered into, that I've shared the work with. So that creates for me a desire to make maybe the work in a different way or see it in a different way. I don't see it as complete until I finish a work, if it is alive, as it is in this piece that I made for you. It was customized, it was variable, it was designed for you. It's never been seen this way. Come back to it and see it, and it's complete because it happened that way. You know, it's sort of like pencils down, you're done. So I think completeness has its own kind of turbulence and adventure that we always realize.
Thank you, Rina, for these remarks. I mean, it's just been extraordinary to hear from you. These wide-ranging reflections on life and on creativity, and not only the works that we see in the galleries, which are extraordinary. And for those of you who haven't yet had a chance to see anything beyond the pictures on your screen, I do encourage you to take a walk through the galleries and really experience them in 3 dimensions, because they really do communicate very differently to the full kind of panoply of our senses, as we've heard. But I was really struck by the way you connected these themes, these kind of, you know, simple and very almost elemental operations of desiring, of liking, of putting 2 and 2 together, of bringing things together in space, with a perspective that is not limited to humanity, right? That you kind of connected very explicitly to a reality that's greater than the human world, not only in the sense of landscape, but also the creatures who inhabit that landscape and make homes in it with the kind of detritus that we give them, in the same way that we also use what is around us to create our homes. And I thought it was just a really wonderful way for us not only to get to know the work in this preliminary way, but also to get to know you. Of course, we'll have many other opportunities to hear more about your work and your ideas while you're here with us at Syracuse. And I really look forward to that. But I am also looking forward to hearing from our audience tonight. And so if you have a question that you would like to ask Rina, please do enter it into the chat right now, or I believe we can also raise hands. And if you want to ask your question using your human voice, we'd love to hear it. So please do let us know what you'd like to hear from Rina. So we have a question in the chat right now from Iman Fayyad, who says, thank you so much for this talk and for sharing your beautiful work with us at SU. I'm curious how you conceive of the relationship between the viewer and your art within conventional standards of art as an object of display. Because of their very haptic, tactile, and immersive nature, your works invite viewers to develop intimate perceptual relationships with them beyond the visual. I'm curious if you ever consider what it would mean for viewers to be able to touch and feel the materials in your work and develop visceral reactions beyond the visual.
Well, definitely the intention is there on my part to make the experience one about our own touch, you know. Touch is really how you make the work, you know, touching and choosing materials, not just seeing them. And it's a very important point. In some sense, I think, if any, there could be a difference between sculpture, installation, and painting and video work. It would be that this awareness of touch that is very essential. Because, I mean, having only a limited experience in making video and making paintings, the kind of touching you do when you are breaking things down, tearing them, cutting them, stitching them, forming them with your fingers, is one that allows you to have not only thoughts about process, which we talk about a lot in art, process and composition and method, but I think very importantly, you know, the intellect, the emotional, living, intellectual self. Ideas come out of touching, and they come out of this physical world that we have around us that are sent by not just our five senses, but even senses we don't anticipate yet, that we are somehow connected to everything that we don't see and touch, but feel, are aware of universe. I know I always find it very important to think about how we imagine all those things that are outside our visual awareness, that we can maybe have a vocabulary of touch, something fuzzy, something slick, something oily, that we have knee-jerk reactions to because we think we are knowledgeable. But what about, you know, having, you know, lived a life where I'm aware of science, those things that we don't see, and having vision that is aware of electrons and, you know, on the molecular level, and the stars, the universe and the galaxy beyond. We think about those things and we feel, and we have the kind of awareness of imagining what that touch would be like. And I think that when you go to a place where you can draw up those missing places in your vocabulary of touch, you find yourself really kind of having to lose yourself in that. And certain things that allow us to imagine, like we talk about near-death experiences or first encounters with things as awakenings. And I think they're very relevant to how we understand the limits of our bodies, but also to see that, you know, our bodies are not the only thing that exist, and live things are not the only things that exist. And I know I do think of how what we see is not what it is. And so whether the mountains can touch or the waters can touch us back, or has a memory of our presence, and how we conceive of that memory is very important to, I think, enjoying and making space for more things that we can touch.
Sort of building on this, we have a question from Nick Bowman, who asks, if you had any thoughts or notes on sensory immersion in digital or metaverse spaces, virtual and augmented reality, for example. He asks, as a scholar of interactive media and psychological connections with digital and on-screen content, especially given how physical and visceral your content is, the content of your art. Nick is curious how you see digital worlds and expressions.
I'm not sure if I would say I could imagine digital worlds. I've never been really involved in digital media per se. And I think that what I find interesting about digital media is its kind of way of sending you into a non-real world. It's almost like a dream world. And at the same time, it's induced dreams. I don't know if I like induced dreams. Whether it's a chemical thing, you know, a reaction to body chemistry, chemistry created out of what you take in your mouth, or a digital space that is constructed out of manipulation or topography that is circulated between people collaboratively to insert you in a new reality. All those things are very important, I think, in understanding what the limits of your awareness of time is. I think about time, and I think I'm very much involved in a process of making that is still frozen in some way. And the frozenness of something, which art attempts to do, I mean, even in imagining that this is going to survive and look the same 100 years from now as it will be tomorrow when I walk into the space, is what, you know, sometimes sculptors deal with. They're going the other direction, that this kind of stillness is a preoccupation, the impossibility of stillness. And definitely I like this narrower space, which it has broader ramifications. And I think in some ways, it's exciting for me to know that in a world where everything in the visual world and the concrete world can be displayed in digital media, it basically cannot. Nothing can be reproduced. And I think that our inability to make reproduction or the digital space become a mirror or a producer of something we can control is an interesting way of understanding how this kind of intelligence can be understood as more than what we are able to imagine. I think everything is always live, even things that appear still. And so philosophically, I think about that nothing is still.
It's such a striking comment, because when you enter the gallery, the stillness is, I think, one of the strongest effects that a viewer experiences, this kind of the incredible fragility of these combinations of materials that you've brought together in the gallery, especially, the kind of delicate accumulations of pigments on the floor of the gallery, which, seem as if they could just be dispersed with the movement of a garment, right? So it's wonderful to hear how you think about this combination of movement and stillness and the temporary nature of what you're doing in the gallery in the larger sense, in relation to this kind of ongoing experience of informational flow that we inhabit most of the time these days, and especially while we're on this Zoom call with people from all over, not just the region, but the world. We are coming near to the end of our time, but I do see that Rina Ray has her hand up, and I want to turn the mic back over to her for one final comment, since she was so generous as to bring us all together for this conversation tonight. Rina, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sam. And literally, we see the floor of the museum being transformed by Rina at the same time. Rina, Patty Carey had asked a question about your works, and if you could comment on them. And of course, we don't have time to do all of that today, and partly because we are reserving that for your lecture. But while we have these two slides up of you making the site-specific work, or making the work site-specific here, A World Lost, which has to do with climate change, the patterns of river floors and floor beds, if you could tell us a little bit more about how you enter your own work, because it's a very powerful image to show of you working. You become part of the sculpture, part of all the movements that are then flowing through the floor itself. And then if you could also tell us about the feather that was added here. You may or may not remember this was collected for you to put into the installation, but let's start with the idea of, again, going back to Iman's question about the tactile, the haptic, how you experience that yourself while making the art. And then perhaps the insertion of something local into your work that helps make it part of the story of the place that you decide to show this work in.
Well, I think that when you have to remake a work, it's very exciting for the artist. It's not just, you're not a technician of your own work. And it's a sensory space where you're kind of feeling, it's almost like a seance. You're feeling the space, you're feeling the presence of a place, and you're choosing, for myself, there are those components of the work that are fixed. They are a palette. I choose from that palette. And then there's things that I add that are new. There are new experiences and color and added materials. And of course, I always like to invite, as you had indicated, the locale that I'm staging this landscape to have an ingredient from the landscape. in this case, the black feather. And I think that makes it, a very kind of fun and intimate way of thinking, what are the limits of what you can incorporate into the work? Does it have a limit? And definitely it does not. And then the thing is that the fragility of the work is what makes it exciting to create, because you can be, when something is fragile, you can be more daring because it will end. You're not signing off the Eiffel Tower for all of Paris to be committed to, and Syracuse to be committed to this work. There's a transience that I'm excited about that allows someone with immigrant identity to take a measure of experimentation to another level, both in conjuring up that the fragile, what is fragile, can be very, has staying power. And then those things that seem so very permanent can feel very slippery, maybe. All these things are being shifted, and World Lost has a kind of very long and large title that talks about the end of the world, but it also talks about the beginning of the world. And it talks about it not only in a dark way in terms of, environmental conditions that may create our end, but also that really the world as we know it was never fixed and was always ready for our possible leaving. And in that sense, I kind of, when you think about immigrant identity, if you can for a moment, you realize that human beings are the immigrant in the world. We've come here at a certain time and we will leave at a certain time. And everything has these beginnings and endings and continuations that is so hard to accept. It's the permanence that we strive for, that we are most agitated when things seem slippery. And this piece is a slippery piece.
Well, that seems as good a place as any to draw our conversation to a close, since we are only allotted this one small hour in the flow of time. We can take a momentary pause. This conversation will, of course, continue in other fora over the course of the next few days and weeks, and in which people from across the university will have a chance to hear about more of Rina's art in greater detail from a variety of angles, which we have not been able to broach this evening. So if you had ideas that this conversation sparked, please do bring them as you come back and hear from us again in the future. But with that, we will all sign off and hopefully see you again soon.